Our imagination of Indian sepoys is tinged with nationalist yearning. Today, they are typically portrayed as revolutionaries and forgotten heroes of the world wars. But there's much more to these men. As sepoys left their homelands and crossed the oceans, they witnessed a world being conquered and exploited by Western might, of which they were an integral aspect. And they sought to understand, interpret, and occasionally even profit from it all. From planning revolts in Java to condemning British rapacity in China, overseas sepoys were some of the most fascinating figures of the early modern period. I'm Anirudh Kanisetti, history and author of Lords of the Deccan. Welcome to Thinking Medieval, where every week we tell you something new about our complex, innovative past. Always feel free to check out our research and citations below, and remember that we're all figuring out how to think about our messy, bloody, dazzling history. In previous editions of Thinking Medieval, we've talked about the Sanskrit cosmopolis, a sprawling geocultural world extending across medieval South and Southeast Asia. Highly skilled personnel moved throughout this world, especially Sanskrit-speaking ritual experts and poets. By the 14th century, new forms of cosmopolitanism had spread through the Indian Ocean region, privileging Persian speakers instead. So, by the time European trading companies established themselves here in the 17th and 18th centuries, this oceanic space had already seen cosmopolitanism, if somewhat unevenly, for many centuries. In the late 18th century, as the British East India Company began recruiting and deploying Indian troops across the ocean, records were kept about their conduct. This offers us an insight into how common people experienced Indian Ocean cosmopolitanism as well. It wasn't limited to the elite. Historian Claude Markowitz, in Armed Cosmopolitanisms, Indian Sepoys and Their Travels in the Service of the East India Company, studied letters and documents left behind by British officials discussing their Indian troops. They made much of the fact that sepoys followed dietary restrictions requiring ghee, fresh vegetables, and so on. Despite all this, sepoys were crucial to colonial expeditions across the Eastern Hemisphere. They cost almost 40% less than European troops because they didn't pay them properly and didn't demand meat and liquor. They were also considered more disciplined and docile. And so, as early as 1762, Indian sepoys were deployed all the way to the Philippines. But British records also reveal that Indian troops were a more complicated lot than expected. Complaints were lodged against their bad behavior with women. Some sepoys deserted their regiments, while others were left behind in the Philippines when the expedition was completed, either because they were too ill to travel or because they had taken local wives. In Indian communities in Southeast Asia, historian Ajit Singh Rai writes that their descendants still live near Manila. During expeditions in China, British officers were concerned that Indian troops might mutiny due to inadequate provisions of purified rations. But few disturbances actually occurred over food, suggesting that Indian sepoys were actually fine with eating in foreign lands. It's possible that they actually introduced new tastes to Indian markets. One of the most fascinating stories of overseas sepoys comes from Egypt, as recounted by historian Maya Jasanoff in her book Edge of Empire: Lives, Culture and Conquest in the East. In July 1801, Captain John Budgeon, accompanied by two Brahmin sepoys from the Bengal army, explored the ruins of an ancient Egyptian temple. Outside the temple, the sepoys found idols that they thought was the god Vishnu. They also interpreted the bas-reliefs on the walls and pillars as Hindu deities. This was an extraordinary moment, according to Jasanoff, and I quote, when ancient Egypt and modern Hindus came face to face for the first recorded time. How remarkable that South Asians sought to understand a long-forgotten culture through the lens of their own gods and beliefs. Religious affinities could also lead to cosmopolitan friendships. As Markowitz writes, in 1811, a Malaccan Muslim teacher mentioned befriending some Indian Muslim sepoys who taught him Hindustani. Sepoys also found ways of striking out on their own. In 1815, a contingent from the Bengal army was dispatched to Java to fight against the Dutch. At some point in the expedition, the troops encountered the colossal medieval Hindu-Buddhist relics of Prambanan and Borobudur and began to envision Java as the land of Brahma. Soon after, a certain Subedar Dhaukal Singh established contact with the Sultan of Surakarta in central Java. The Sultan, a Muslim, was regarded as a descendant of Rama. Upper caste sepoys soon intermarried with Javanese aristocrats and plotted to stage a mutiny and set up a small kingdom. But their scheme was uncovered and mercilessly crushed. It's fascinating to witness on the ruins of a medieval Indian Ocean cosmopolitanism a nudge towards a modern one. But perhaps the most outstanding example of a dissenting cosmopolitan sepoy is Thakur Gadadhar Singh, who published a book titled Chin Mein Tera Mas, or 13 Months in China, in 1901, loosely translated by academics Anand A. Yang, Kamal Sheel and Ranjana Sheel. In 1900, Singh had been part of the international expedition of 20,000 men that crushed the Boxer uprising, ransacked Beijing, and humiliated the imperial Qing dynasty. He published his account just after returning to India. Singh was one of the few literate sepoys having completed his matriculation. Throughout his life, he authored 9 books covering subjects ranging from Japanese Bushido to women's empowerment in England. Today, he is considered one of the outstanding pioneers of modern Hindi literature. Singh's account of the uprising stands out for its anti-colonial stance, verging on pan-Asianism. Describing his regiment's march from the shore to Beijing, he paints a despondent scene with bodies strewn everywhere, villages reduced to ashes, and dogs chewing on corpses. Quote, "Even hearts of stone would be moved by such a sight. There was no need for us to feel compassion because we had come to fight the Chinese, but seeing people of our same color generated emotion for them in our minds, if not our actions. The Chinese are Buddhists. They share religion with Hindustanis. As inhabitants of Asia, they are also almost fellow countrymen. In complexion, tradition, and culture too, they are not dissimilar. Why has God inflicted this distress on them? Did God not want to help them?" There is much more to say about sepoys, merchants, and other Indian globetrotters in the colonial world. I want to point out, though, that these stories could not have taken place without enthusiastically embracing European powers. The moral complexity of the sepoy's position is best encapsulated by Gadadhar Singh himself when reflecting on the brutal looting of Beijing after the international expedition had ended the Boxer uprising. Quote, "What more is there to say? Hindustan is a neighbor and also a brother of China, but did Hindustanis indulge any less in looting and atrocities?" If you have questions or comments, we'd love to hear them. Follow us everywhere on social media. You can find me on Instagram at Anirudh and at Connected Histories, and on Twitter at Kanisetti. We'll see you next week.